Donald Trump has threatened to use America's federal military to end protests that have gripped dozens of US cities over the death of George Floyd and police brutality.
If a city or state refuses to take the actions that are necessary to defend the life and property of their residents, then I will deploy the United States military and quickly solve the problem for them.
To do this, the president would need to invoke a group of laws known as the Insurrection Act, which dates from 1807. US governors generally have the authority to maintain order, including deploying their state's National Guard for law enforcement or disaster relief. The federal military is usually prohibited from domestic law enforcement. In the past, the president and a governor have generally agreed on the need for troops to be deployed. But the Insurrection Act outlines an exception that allows a president to deploy US forces without consultation if domestic unrest has interfered with normal law enforcement. The Insurrection Act was last used in 1992 in Los Angeles, when rioting broke out after 4 police were acquitted for beating Rodney King. California Governor Pete Wilson requested federal assistance from President Bush to quell those riots that ended in 63 deaths and caused an estimated $1 billion in property damage.
President Eisenhower sends 500 troops of the 101st Airborne Division of the United States Army.
Presidents have used the Insurrection Act to override governors in the past, including sending federal soldiers to enforce desegregation in the 1950s. A law professor from the University of Dayton says unrest in the US hasn't reached the threshold yet for invoking the Insurrection Act. If President Trump did employ the act, it's unlikely a court challenge would stand in his way. The US courts have been historically reluctant to second-guess a president's military declarations. Richard Pilders is a professor of constitutional law from New York University.
If you have a situation where the governors don't want federal military in there, legally, there's nothing they could do to stop that. I suppose they could go to court and try to argue the president is not doesn't have the authority under the Insurrection Acts. But again, because the authority delegated is very broad, it's hard to see the governors winning a claim like that.